Hello, I'm Papa Biceps. You're watching the Thorin YouTube channel, and remember, don't fuck with Papito.
Fnatic are the new ninjas in pajamas in more ways than one. Firstly, they have this core of players who simply cannot be kicked. Whatever binds them together, past success in each case, for some reason overwhelms any future potential for upgrading a position or removing a problematic player. So in the case of Ninjas in Pajamas, obviously the core we most remember is Get Right, Forest, Exist and Freiburg, the four that played together for I think it was 5 years. Now, what people might not be aware of is, actually that core was the first 5 players, all of the original NiP players, so those 4 plus Fiflaren, as I made the point in my article on NiP recently. But eventually that squad did so poorly that they hit rock bottom. They weren't even making the playoffs of big tournaments. They famously went out of ESWC in incredibly shocking fashion, including losing to a team called Platinium from France, who most of you rightfully will never have heard of and won't consider a top team. And you know what? Most players in that squad you will never have heard of. I think the only player off the top of my head who actually is still playing was maybe Mistu. That's about the only player you might be aware of who played for LDLC in the last few years and in fact was cut from that team. So Fiflaren was a member of that squad that went to rock bottom. They cut him. Actually, it was official that he retired, but let's not get into that now, eh? Then beyond that, you have the same pattern play out again. They have the same 4. Okay, they have success. It's not quite terrible. Eventually, they bottom out with Freiburg. They don't make it to majors. They get in Draken, but they're having mediocre success at lands. They make the same cut there. Few months after that, what was it, 6 months later, they've had another win with Exist, but then they've gone right back downhill again because that was fool's gold, as I told you guys. And they make the decision to kick Exist. And finally, we're down to 2. And you know what? As I made the point of in that article, realistically, Get Right and Forest were the real core of NiP. I know it seemed like Freiburg and Exist were because they still had vaguely some success, or they had occasional bursts of success, and they could believe that it was the core. And obviously, they wanted a great social environment around themselves. But if you look at it, Get Right and Forest are the ones that go back pre-1.6, pre-CSGO into 1.6 when they were playing in SK Gaming and when they stood back-to-back at the end of Fnatic. So then you look at the Fnatic core now, and who is that unkickable core? Well, it's Flusher, it's JW, and it's Crims, right? 3 players who together have won 2 majors, and 2 of them, Flusher and JW, have won 3 majors together, the most in CSGO history. So first of all, I would even speculate when you see that Crims obviously went back from Godsent when 3 of them came over to Godsent after the Fnatic team broke up around the player break of 2016. Crims went back over to Fnatic to play with Dennis and Olofmeister. So, okay, I would personally speculate along similar lines to Get Right and Forest being the real core of NiP, the two that can't really be kicked and will stand together no matter what. I would suspect that Flusher and JW likewise make up the true core of Fnatic. But at the moment, Flusher, JW and Crims seemingly are the core that can't be kicked. Now, yes, they were all members of the championship winning Fnatic team since 2014. So there's a good reason as to why they're the core. But again, I think the core is really JW and Flusher, not least because it's an older core. So again, it ties to similar notion of having success that goes the whole way through the game with the person that you're in the core with. And in terms of the Crims leaving after the Godsent one, that kind of shows that maybe it wasn't as unbreakable a core with Crims involved as seemingly it might be, whereas Flusher and JW have stuck together for all this time. Now, the danger with that kind of core, and the reason why I'm actually using it as a negative that Fnatic are the new NiP, is when you have a core in mind where you're not even considering removing players from that core, you will start to only view the problems in the team as coming from or stemming from or being associated with the 2 players in this case when you've got a core of 3, or the 1 player in the course of NiP who had the core of 4 and therefore just cut the 5th player over and over again. You'll start to view the only problems as being things that come from the other players that aren't in your core, and you will ignore the problems of the players that are in your core. To use the old adage, when all you have is a hammer, every problem starts to look like a nail, because obviously that's the only tool you have to solve the problem. Now, in NiP, that was kicking the 5th player over and over again. Makalele, Alu, Pitt, Draken. It kept happening over and over again. But you know what? In NiP, at least they can say they're down to only 2 pure core players now. So they can actually change up to 3 players in NiP, completely reinvent themselves. We'll get right in Forest, sure, but totally different players, different in-game leader, different support, different other star player, new Orpera. And as a result, NiP having that core isn't really a problem in NiP. Now they have a lot of directions they can go, and because they don't have the same bonds to the other 3 players, they don't have anything restricting them from cutting those players or upgrading of those players or shifting the roles of those players around. There's nothing to stop them in that sense. They've actually gotten over their issue they had with that core. Once you remove the emotional and the personal bonds that are between players, now you can actually act like a sports organization. You can actually act as in, is this person doing his job? Is he doing his job relative to where we could be and where we should be as a team? No, right, well then remove him. He's not the right player. Get someone else in who's good now or who's come up in the last few years. And yeah, we don't have an emotional connection with him or any personal bonds, but he's a better player and he can make us the #1 team right now. NiP is not anywhere close to being the #1 team, but they are further along the path to potentially being the #1 team than someone like Fnatic is. That's why when you look at someone like Virtus.pro, now that they've kicked Taz, can also kick other players. And once they kick more players, it makes it a lot easier to bring in other players, and whether they are, in the end, the right player or not, to replace them or to bring in extra talent and to reposition your org to being a potential #1 team again. Because when you have this core that is set in stone, it limits where you can go as a team. Because effectively, you're choosing the legacy of what you had with those players in the past over the present, where you could be a better team, and the future, where you can pivot and improve your team and get back to the very top. Because you look at what happened to NiP from sticking with that core. They were the best team in the world, 2012, obviously undisputed. They didn't lose a single game on LAN. 2013, still the best team in the world for most of the year. It wasn't until basically the latter end of, I think, September that the very games team took over into Titan in the end of next year. But you know what? NiP was still top 2 this entire time. And by the time you got to around Copenhagen Games in 2014, they were back to #1 again. Then you look at 2015. They were, after they'd already kicked for Flaren, he'd left the team, they got in Makalele, then they had Alu. They were a contender for the best team in 2015, up until about the middle of the year. They were right there with Fnatic and LDLC. Now, they weren't winning titles, so they weren't really a contender, but they were a contender in terms of they were contending to win those individual titles. Then, in the middle of the year, they dropped off. Things got bad with Alu. They were starting to place like top 8 at tournaments. They were no longer even a team that was highly ranked in the top 5. They weren't winning tournaments still. They were a team that had gone from being in major finals to not even making top 4 at majors. The lowest point being the latter half of 2015, where they absolutely fell apart. And all of a sudden, they were a team that many squads could defeat. Flipside beat them with Hiko as a stand-in, in a best of 3 on LAN at ESWC. Then you come to 2016. Now they're just a dark horse team. They're no longer vaguely close to a contender. But you know what? As a dark horse team, they had a pretty good year. They won 3 titles, but they were never close to the real #1. Like, they did, I think, briefly get #1 ranking in some rankings towards the end of the year when we had that uncertainty era where everything was a real mess, but they weren't a true #1. Then you come into the next year, 2017, they're bombing majors, they're going down to tier 2 at times, they only have 1 notable title, and even then it's another big fluke title. 2018 comes around, NiP's just a team battling to be top 10. They have no real threat of winning a title. No one's really scared of NiP in the traditional sense. They've let their entire org go because they waited too long to make the big roster moves. So you look at Fnatic now. Is Fnatic looking like a team willing to make the big moves, willing to make the drastic moves that can get them to #1 again? Well, you might say, hey, Thorin, they've already kicked a player. They've kicked Lekro. Lekro was not a core member of the team. That is not enough. You look, again, they're looking at their own success. Their own success starts to look like NiP, the NiP Magic era, where you could only win from Magic and you're not ever going to win the tournament otherwise, but you could maybe do really well and finish top 4 or quarterfinals result and give a good game. That's what Fnatic is right now. That Katowice win was pure NiP Magic, even though it was Fnatic doing it. It was an overperformance by a player in Flusher, a legacy player. It was veteran play from the rest of your team. It was the young players having pretty good games that were, in some senses, above and beyond what you normally expect. And you had a great play in Crims, which sure, there wasn't often as many times in the NiP Magic, except you could argue Forest often had a very good performance in the NiP Magic wins, especially in the maps they would win. So you look at it, NiP Magic style play has actually been carrying Fnatic for a while now. Beyond the kind of VeXii win, it's been carrying them at majors where they've been able to make playoffs at majors, able to make top 4 majors, even though they haven't been, again, an elite team for quite a while now. They're not capable of winning a major, but they've had pretty good results there because they've got the veteran savvy, because they have overperformance by certain players once in a while. So what's mad is Fnatic has become more NiP, more NiP, than NiP has, because they're the ones that have a rigid core. They're the ones who seemingly refuse to even look at cutting a Flusher or a JW, no matter what their level of play is like or what they need in their squad. They've made this core. They've now become even more like NiP because they've even added fucking Exist, someone who was cast off by NiP. NiP knew it was time to move past Exist. Fnatic thought, no, time to buy into Exist coin while it's at its fucking lowest. Crazy stuff. And not only that, as an in-game leader, not just as an okay player as he was in FaZe, as the in-game leader going forwards. And they've cut this young in-game leading talent who brought them some championships in favor of this old player who seemingly is washed up and is long beyond and outmoded as an in-game leader. So at this point in time, it's Fnatic that's looking more like NiP, while it's NiP who's actually seeming like the team willing to adapt, willing to get new talent, willing to make the moves. And yes, right now, I'd put Fnatic above NiP. But in terms of the potential in the future, it's looking a lot more favorable for NiP right now. This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Mikkel Hansen, Bash, Daniel Yordanov, Yordan Tsenkov, TTMXMP, VeXii, HawpT, Robert Baxter, Travis Greb, and a special thanks to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to get teasers for my upcoming work? Find out who's coming next, what topics are being discussed? Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest to appear on one of my shows or in one of my videos? Would you like to ask a question in my monthly Patreon AMA, or perhaps even discuss esports as part of a discussion show I run on a monthly basis? Donators can also discuss the topics expounded upon in my videos with me and the other patrons on our Patreon page. All of this and more at the Patreon link below.